Recording. How's everybody doing? Anybody go to any Halloween parties over the weekend? All right. So, a couple things I want to talk about before we get started. One is, I'm sure the video is going to change a little bit. We got this different desk. Let me know. I kind of have the camera a little further away. I don't know that any of the particular hand gestures I make are important, but occasionally maybe they are. And if it's too far away and I need to reconfigure this, let me know. But what this will mean is I'll be able to stand up and go back and forth, and I feel like it's going to be less of that. Greg disappeared behind the desk for a little while, and now he's back, like, thing going on. How many of you got to go last week to see Michelle Maynard talk? Anybody go see that? Any takeaways from that? Like, I heard that it went pretty well.
Yeah, she talked about a lot. People asked a lot of good questions.
Yeah. So, something that kind of came up that I hadn't thought about is that she was a producer for a long time, which is an interesting job in the game industry. And we may talk about that a little bit on the day when we're talking about careers and stuff like that. But that's actually a really interesting career path. Like, how do you get to producer? And the job of producer is kind of the person who makes sure everything gets done on time, and make sure that everybody's happy. Like, they're kind of the go-between between the people who are working on the project and the people who are demanding the project gets done, right? And like a good producer can mean like a huge amount, depending on how happy you are with your job, right? Like they can make your job awesome, or they can make your job miserable. So I wanted to just quickly kind of remind you, Mark Thomas is going to be. This is November 8th, which is that's not this Thursday. I think it's next Thursday. Yes. So it's not this coming Thursday, but next Thursday, Mark Thomas is going to be talking. I chatted with him not too long ago. I think he's going to talk a little bit about his path to his career there. If animation is something you like, he is particularly, he is a character animator. That's what he does. He's doing it for games, but the career is not that much different for film or games. So I strongly encourage you to come out and listen to him. And I know that Catherine is in the process of getting a fourth speaker lined up, and I think it's going to be someone from visual effects and sort of the motion graphics side of stuff. I think he's a former ETSU student, if that's the person that she's still getting to do that, who has his own motion graphics studio. Motion graphics is something else we'll talk about a little bit more on Career Day, but it is actually probably one of the it's one of the job titles that is in high demand right now. Like, there's a lot of people looking for motion graphics artists, and it's one of the things that we cover here, but not really like all in one concentration. It sort of falls in between animation, visual effects, and visualization. And so it's a really interesting career, though. There are local companies who are constantly looking for motion graphics artists. So we'll be talking about some of that, and I'm sure she'll hang up some flyers. We kind of keep an eye on the backgrounds for that. So I'm hoping today is not going to be an extremely complicated day. I want to take some time and talk about texture. I recognize that you're probably right in the middle of doing all of your models. How many of you have? So we did the coffee cup together. How many of you have like already finished all of the rest of your models for your breakfast scene? Anybody? Okay. How many of you have done at least one more model for your breakfast scene? All right. So just sort of letting you know, next class period we're going to be doing some simulation, and that stuff's going to get heavy quick. And so if you're putting off all of the modeling to the end, like I'm getting ready to throw some other stuff at you that's going to bog you down. So I would be working on the modeling relatively soon. just so you have some, most of that stuff done, and you don't have to hurry up and put it all together in the end. However, I was a nice guy, and I actually created a model for you. And so this I think counts as one of your 7 if you would like it to, although you're welcome to go over that. Up in our, nope, wrong folder. Up in the ETSU E3 folder, you got DIGM classes, Greg, POA, resources, and you'll see that there's a serialbox.ma. We're going to talk about that MA here in just a minute, but what I'd like you to do is, if you haven't already modeled your own serial box, or even if you have and you would rather use this one as part of the example, whatever, go ahead and copy that file, Control-C, right, and then paste it into wherever your project is. Now for me, I'm going to be working out of a project I have on the network. I think that's where it's at. Breakfast, scenes. Oh, this is old. I'm not sure that's the one I want to use. Did I read on this? No. It's old too. I'm going to go ahead and put it in my breakfast folders. So I'm going to put it in the scenes of wherever my project is, right? So go ahead and hit paste. And so now I have a copy of it in there. The reason for this is I did it this way to sort of show you. I get this question a lot. Some of you modeled a spoon in one Maya file and saved it, and then modeled a bowl in another Maya file and saved it. And then you went, wait, how do I get those in the same file? Right? Which is a good question. So I thought that would be part of what I would show you today. First things first, you want to open one of your projects. What's the first thing I do before I open a project? Set my project, right? Got to tell Maya which project folder we're looking at. Set project. I'm going to set mine to this bridge project, or this breakfast project here. So Control C. Go ahead and just paste mine in right there and hit set. And then that way I can open up my breakfast scene. I think it's this one. And I have a feeling there's going to be a lot of textures and stuff broken in mine. There we go. Look at that. Let me delete a bunch of these. So this is in no way a finished piece, but just something I started messing around with. Actually, let me go ahead and get rid of my lights and stuff in here too. And I have a camera sort of locked here, but I'm going to go ahead and go into my perspective camera so we can see my scene. Right. And so this is what I have so far on my breakfast. I want my cereal box in here with this. Right. In fact, I'm going to go ahead and delete this camera. So how we're going to do that, this file that I just copied in here, right, and you probably have copied it into your project too. I want you to notice that it says serialbox.ma. And all of those other files are serialbox.mb. Right. Now, that's not a huge that's not a huge difference. They are both Maya files. Okay? I want to show you the difference, and talk just a second about the reason you may ever want to save as a .ma file. So if I go to my breakfast scene here, I'm just going to pick one of these old ones. I'm going to right click and say open with, and instead of choosing Maya, I'm going to choose just a text document reader, a notepad. Okay, so you can do this with pretty much any file, right? Is you can open, because all a file is a series of commands, right? But when you write it, when you create this with a programming language and compile it, it compiles it into pretty much gibberish, right? If you look in here long enough, you may find an actual word here or there, right? Like we get right here appears to be the word headverse, and then we have Maya for 8. There's some real words in here, but for the most part, this is not something you could ever interpret, right? This is the MB file. The B stands for binary, Maya binary file. MA is a Maya ASCII file. Now, the reason you may ever want to save a file as an MA, and if I go to File, Save Scene As, you'll see I have the option right now, Maya binary or Maya ASCII, ASCII, right? And what it means when we save a file as a Maya ASCII file is it means that this is actually going to be written in a language I can kind of understand, right? So if I open my ASCII file with a notepad, although there's still going to be a lot of stuff that doesn't make sense, there are real words all over this thing, right? You'll see serialbox.ma up there. You'll see set attr, ATTR. That means set attribute, right? So that's telling, like, if you understand the scripting language of Maya, you could actually go in here and make changes to your Maya scene in this Maya file without ever opening Maya. Like I could move a sphere to a different location just by changing some of this text, right? The only reason that's really important is because you'll see right up here, requires Maya 2018 FF08, requires M2A, like it requires all these different things in here, right? Occasionally, you will get in a situation where you need to be able to change some of this information, right? And where this usually used to pop up, and I don't know if it's still an issue or not, is if you were working in Maya 2018, but the company you were working for was working in Maya 2017, and you needed to send them a file that they could open, right? And for some reason, that file wasn't backwards compatible. What you could do is go in here and change this 2018 to a 2017, right? Now, I just wanted to show you that there are two different files. I often get the question of why and which is best, and that is a debate for the century there. Like that, they'll both open in Maya. They both contain all the same information. It's really just how it's encoded. The Maya ASCII file, a lot of people prefer it for technical reasons. Like you can run processes on it from outside of Maya. So if you know somebody who's a programmer and they need to be able to like run a bunch of scripts on a batch file or on a batch full of Maya files, they maybe would prefer you use Maya ASCII. Right? In most of the cases, for the next 3 years of your life, 4 years of your life here, it's not really going to matter. I will say that to me, it feels like a Maya ASCII file, if something goes corrupt, has maybe some slight chance of being able to be retrieved. But Maya usually defaults to the Maya binary file, so that also means that Maya kind of seems like they want to prefer the binary file. That may just be because we can change the backwards compatibility if we use ASCII. So, anyway, I just wanted to talk about that. Don't sweat it too much. Just recognize that an MA and an MB file, there's actually no difference in what you're going to see in Maya. Right? I can save the same file, one as an MA, one as an MB. If I open them both, I'm getting the same thing. So, I have that cereal box in here, and I want to bring it into my current breakfast scene. Now, something that some people will do, and this will work, is you can just drag and drop this into there. Right? That seems like the easy way of doing it. And we get cereal box. Occasionally, you need to import multiple files. And we can just go to File, where's it at? Import, right? And I can import my cereal box that way as well. And so you can model all of your different objects in different Maya files, bring them all into one master breakfast file when you're done, right? Now, let's talk about scale. Before I go on, I made this box for today's exercise. You are more than welcome to use it in the entire project. Trying to take some of the workload off of what you have to make right now. But recognize you don't have to. Like if you have some custom cereal box, it's not that I'm going to be like, oh, you didn't use that one I gave you. Like if you have something you're using, that's fine. Let me talk kind of quickly just how I made this. It really isn't a super complicated model. I just made a box. I sort of Googled sort of the ratio of a box, and I think it's about 12 inches by 8 inches. So I got roughly that ratio, right? But once you get your box size, I extruded this face, Control E, and then I scaled that extrusion in. So I scaled it inward just a little bit. And the reason I did that is that left me this weird lip all the way around it, right? And then I extruded one more time, Control E, and pushed it down. And so now I have a box with an inside and an outside. The reason I did that is because my cereal box, if I go out to the store and I buy a cereal box, there's only printing on one side, right? There's only printing on the outside of your cereal box. Occasionally they'll put like a coupon or something on the inside of it, right? But on the inside, it just looks like cardboard. And so I want to be able to apply both that cardboard texture and the outside of the box texture onto this. So I kind of made it two-sided in that way. There's other tricks that you could do that way. But what this is also going to do is it's going to give our box just a little bit of thickness, right? Because cereal box is not paper thin. There's a little bit to that, and this will just sort of add some depth to it. And then the next thing I did is I just extruded these two things up, sort of moved those out a little bit, and then extruded my two flaps up, and just kind of scaled those in a little bit, right? So pretty much that's all I have. I just sort of flared those out a little bit so we can see them a little bit more clearly. So it's not a hugely complicated, I didn't model this because it's something that's too complicated for you to model. I modeled it because I wanted to sort of expedite today's class and sort of get it going a little faster. So this is our cereal box. Rename that. That's ugly. There we go. Okay. So we have our cereal box here, and just sort of the first thing we need to think about is scale. Right? Our box is currently just a little bit bigger than our coffee cup, right? I usually like a pretty big coffee cup, and so you can kind of tell that in comparison to the donut I have there. So I'm just going to kind of eyeball it, and maybe make mine just a little bit bigger here. I would still think, yes.
Why is it adding a number?
Honestly, it's because of how I imported it. I'll delete that and sort of show you. When I dragged it in there, it was like how it names it. It's where I had imported it earlier. It's still remembering that node of where I imported it, so it thinks that there's another one in there, even though I've deleted it. So yeah, that's not the no more commands to undo. Okay, it's not ideal, but I'm okay with it. I can probably optimize my scene, and it will get rid of all of those unused nodes. And I would think that now when I import it in, it should be okay. Like, oh man. Let me go get that. I deleted it out of my folder. And that folder too. Come on, Greg. I hit Control Z while my there we go. So yeah, it has something to do with like the history of that. And so now if I drag this in there, hopefully, well, still not doing it the way I want it, but there's a way of getting rid of some of that. It's called the namespace, but I don't really want to get too much into that right now. So, one of the things I will point out here is, well, let me go ahead and scale this up again and get it kind of roughly where we want it to be. This is probably worth like just checking with some reference. So if I just search the word breakfast, go to some images, maybe I'll try breakfast cereal. There we go. And try to see if I can find something where I can compare it, compare my cereal box to a cup. They're not taking good pictures like that, are they?
Well, you have a lot that compare to a bowl. I guess you can compare your cup to a bowl relative to it.
Yeah. So I feel like that's looking pretty close to me. And I mean, I guess the real question is your coffee cup and your donut scale. So we could do something like this. I could also kind of figure this out, like actually, like if a coffee cup is, or if a cereal box is 12 inches tall on average, that's what I was getting, somewhere between 12 to 14. How big do I want my coffee cup to be? And I could actually, and that's one of the great things about the internet is I could probably Google some actual coffee cups and find out what their dimensions are. Right now I'm kind of going to go based off of aesthetic and what I want this scene to look like. Just kind of my thoughts off of this is like, my coffee cup's a little tall for a coffee cup. I would maybe consider going back in there later and scaling it down. So we have this, right? And I wanted to talk just a little bit about my scene here, which you'll notice I sort of made a little label for my coffee cup, right? Now this was a while back when I made this, so I'm going to show you just briefly what that texture looks like, right? Which is if I go to my breakfast scene, it's under my source images. I have a whole bunch of them in here. Let me see, mugcolor.tga. Sure, let's open it in Photoshop. Is that the one I'm using? Probably. No, this is a different one. I like this one too, though. I pity the fool that drank all the coffee, because Mr. T's awesome. Anybody follow him on Twitter? It's actually really funny. Which one is mine? Oh, it's probably the Steven Universe color. There we go. I've taught this project for a while. I have multiple coffee cups. So this is what I'm getting with my coffee cup. Right. This is the texture map I had to create in order to get my Steven Universe image to sort of line up on the front of my coffee cup. Right. This was originally the image I just kind of downloaded from the internet to use to make that. And if I wanted to go in and show you like the full PSD file of this, you'll be able to see that, there it is, PSD. Really all I have is Steven on his own layer, some color, and that's pretty much it, right? There is another thing I usually brought into this, though, that we'll talk about, which is our UVs. Right? So I keep using that phrase, U and V, right? So when we were talking about 3D space, we were talking about X, Y, and Z, right? And most people will recognize eventually that X is sort of side to side, Y is usually up and down, Z is depth, like forward and back, right? And that's just sort of Maya's default orientation. If you go to the top view, you're going to be looking down from the Y-axis, right? So when we talk about UVs, what we're talking about is another theoretical space, right? Because all this space is theoretical. Like this doesn't really exist. We can't really go there. It's just we're using the computer to generate these artificial depth, height, all of that stuff, right? And when we did that, like we ended up creating these 3D objects, but we can't make a 3D texture, right? I mean, we can, but that's a different thing altogether, right? When we talk about textures, we are almost always talking about 2D images. Okay, like if you go out with your camera and you take a picture of something, as you know, like you can't turn that around and see what's behind the person you took a picture of, right? Like it's a flat image, right? So when we talk about UVs, we're actually talking about that space, this 2D texture space. Okay, so the way to think about this is I have a 3D object, but I need a 2D texture to apply to this 3D object, right? And Maya is going to give us an option on how to put that on there, but that may not be how we wanted that 2D texture to be applied. Right? The way we can see how it's going to be applied is if we go to Windows, Modeling Editor, and then UV Editor. And what you'll see is that this is the way Maya is thinking about my coffee cup in UV space. Okay, so I know this one's going to be a hard one to kind of, no pun intended, wrap your head around. But here's how I like to think about it. There's sort of two different ways that you can think about this. How many of you have wrapped Christmas presents with wrapping paper before, or birthday presents, either one, right? Any type of present. I really do not care the occasion. 2D paper although it does have depth, for the most part is wrapping paper is 2D, right? Like it's just this flat piece of paper. And we have to get that to wrap around a 3D object. So if you buy somebody a book or a box of something, right? You buy some kid in your life a toy that comes in this nice square box, that's not that hard to wrap, right? It's very easy to wrap that paper around it 4 times, fold in the corners, tape it, it's done. Has anybody ever tried to wrap a basketball with wrapping paper? Can you just imagine that in your head if you haven't? That's really hard to do, right? If we take a basketball and try to wrap a 2D piece of paper around it and we fold it, well, then we just kind of have this like weird U shape, right? And then we fold it again, like the corners start crinkling in. Really, like if you're going to try to wrap a ball with wrapping paper, what I usually do is I just put the ball in the middle, I pull all the wrapping paper up and sort of twist it in a knot at the top, right? And it always looks terrible. Like it's just really hard to wrap a flat piece of paper around a complex 2D object or 3D object. So imagine trying to wrap a coffee cup, right? And what you need to do is not only just wrap it up to where it's hidden, you need to wrap up every little corner of it. Your wrapping paper has to go around the inside of the handle. It has to go down inside of the cup, right? That's what we're doing. We're taking this 2D texture and we're going to try to figure out how to wrap that around the coffee cup. Now that is in theory what we're doing with UVs. In practice, what we're doing is, since we've already usually made our 3D object, we're going to do it the other way around. We're going to unwrap our 3D object so it lines up with the wrapping paper. If you think about that basketball example, the easiest way to wrap a basketball is to cut that basketball up into little bitty pieces and lay it out flat, right? And then you can just fold that piece of paper over, tape it, you're done. So we can cut this off without destroying it, right? Sort of another way that I usually describe this, and it gets a little bit more morbid, is what's called pelting. Anybody in here are hunters? Like to go hunting? Squirrel, deer, anything like that? Lots of people do, and a lot of America was kind of built on this, or at least the west part of America was built on this pursuit of animal pelts, right? So that was part of what Lewis and Clark's expedition. That was part of what their expedition was about, was getting beaver pelts or something like that. And what that means is once they shot an animal that they were hunting, right, they had to take its skin off so it could be used for clothing or whatever that they needed to use it for. And to do that, if they cut the skin, they had to lay it out flat, right? That's kind of what we're doing. We are going to pelt our 3D objects. We're going to cut it in a way that we could unwrap it, unfold it, and lay it out flat. And so when we see this, this is our coffee cup pelting, right? I've cut it in specific ways in this UV space, and I've laid it out flat so it would line up with this texture. Now, what actually happened is I cut it and laid it out flat so I could go into Photoshop and make a texture that lined up where I wanted it to. Okay? So, this is the theory of it, right? Imagine, like, we had originally this 3D coffee cup that's in this shape. I just cut it up into pieces because what I really wanted was a big empty area here where I could put Steven, and then everything else, I just wanted it to be blue, right? But you'll see elements of this. If I right-click in here and I go to UV shell, you'll see like what that is. Like you could probably make a guess that that has something to do with one of our handles here, right? And it does. It's that section of the handle right there. And like some of this may be more or less intuitive of what it is. Like this is sort of the entire outside perimeter of our coffee cup, right? We can sort of tumble around here and see the entire thing. These pieces in here are actually the inside parts of our coffee cup. Not all of them. There's the other one right there, right? And so, and these are sort of the bottoms, right? And I think this right here is sort of that lip that goes around the top. So this is in no way the cleanest set of UVs. I will tell you that the question always arises, do I have to UV unwrap everything? Your UVs are going to be used for a lot of different things, but primarily, at least at this stage, it's for texturing, right? There are other things we will use our UV maps for. We can use those in video games. We can use those to sort of bake in bake in like faster shadow maps, so you don't have to constantly be calculating your shadows. You can already kind of have some shadows built into your objects. There's stuff like that that it's necessary for. But in this case, the only thing we're really going to worry about having clean UVs for are things that we want to apply a texture image to in order to get that texture for it, right? So some of you are going to have like a glass of milk or orange juice or something like that. And your glass is going to be primarily clear and a solid color. Like, yeah, you can UV unwrap that, but really you're just applying a solid color to it. You're not really worrying about textures. So don't sweat those things too much, right? It's still good habit to go ahead and get like some form of clean UVs on there. But really the thing we're going to be worried about is things that we want specific textures for. So that's why I'm using the cereal box as an example. Right? So if I go look at my cereal box, it's right there. There are no UV object mode. There we go. If I go to Windows, Modeling Editor, UV Editor, you'll see that this is how Maya is thinking about this complex box, which is funny because there's only like, there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. There's 6 boxes here, 6 faces here. Like there's way more faces in this actual model. Right? Like it's hard to even understand what's supposed to be what here, right? If I were to, let's see if I can sort of shrink this down so we can see both at the same time. If I were to go over here and select a face on here, like that face, you're like, okay, so that's supposed to represent this side of the box, but like that's square and this is all elongated, right? And then I get into something really interesting is if I go in here and select like this face, what you'll notice is you can't even see that one. It's completely flat, right? If I go in here and start grabbing edges in here, you'll see that there are edges like on top of each other. Like these UVs are just an absolute mess, right? And so if I were to apply a texture to this, I have very little like way of predicting how that texture is going to wrap around it. Maya kind of comes with some built-in like tests. If you go up here on the top of your UV editor and click this checkerboard, what it will do is temporarily place this texture, this checkerboard texture with the words UV1, UV1, 1001 on there. And you'll start to see how that texture wraps around your object. I got this weird, stuff going on here. And then we get stuff like this, which is all staticky. And the reason that's all staticky is it's just stretching one face infinitely or squashing one face infinitely, right? And so this is just a mess, right? I'm going to go back to my object mode and go back to my UVs. And I'm going to go ahead and turn off that checkerboard. So what you'll notice is I can go in here and I can grab sub-objects, right? I can grab this edge, or I can grab even the edge out here, right? And you'll see I grab it in there. And I can move it in UV space, and it doesn't really affect the 3D space of that model. The model still stays in the same orientation. Right? So that's why I say this is another theoretical space. This is where I can move around all of these parts of my model to lay them out flat without messing up the 3D shape of my model, right? And if I were to apply a texture to this, right, it's kind of hard to see. Something you can do so you can see it a little bit better is if you click this button here, you can see your UV shape there a little bit more. If I were to go in here and let's say grab a vertex on this, right, like this vertex here, if I find that in 3D space, or in my UV space, you'll see it's, where is that? Well, let's grab a UV instead. I want to right click and go to UV, select this piece right here, figure out where that is in my model. Okay, it's right here in this corner, right? So it's that UV right there. If I start moving that around, what you'll see is that that UV is lining up really nicely right there in the corner of that checkerboard pattern, right? And if I move this around, what you're seeing is I'm changing what part of this texture that point is looking at, right? And so when we talk about setting up our UVs, it sounds like what I'm saying is you have to untangle this mess of Christmas lights, right? And really that is true. That is what we're doing with UVs. But we have some tools that allow it to go a little faster or help it go a little faster. So I'm going to go in here, object mode. The first thing I'm going to do before we set up some better UVs for this is I'm going to make sure that I have a kind of clean model, right? You'll see I have all these inputs where I modeled it. You'll see I have all of these scale and translate units in here where I've moved it and scaled it. All of that stuff will affect your UVs. Say that again. All of that stuff will affect your UVs. You have to delete your history. This is like a UV issue. Like people will run some of these things on it and they'll be like, oh, it's still not working. It's not working. It's not working. And it's because Maya doesn't think of your model looking like this. Maya thinks you've stretched the model that basically looks like this, right? And so, let me undo that. Control Z. What we have to do is tell Maya, no, this is the final version of this model. Everything, like clean all this up, reset it to a default, right? And we do that with two things. Anybody remember what they are? So you delete history. What was the other one? Yeah, so delete by type history. So I select this object, and it's edit, delete by type, history. And what that's going to do is it's going to erase all of my inputs over there in my channel box. All of this stuff over here, delete by type, history. Now I do want to warn you again, don't do delete all by type because that will delete the history on everything in your scene. And later when you're getting into rigging, you may not want that to happen. That will mess up your character's rig or your object's rig. So delete by type, history, and that's going to wipe out those inputs, right? And then the last thing I want to do is I want to zero all of this out. Does anybody remember how we do that? So we're going to freeze our transformations, right? And that's under Modify, Freeze Transformations. It zeroes all of that stuff out. So again, delete your history, freeze your transformations. Those two things are very important before you do any UV work, right? Okay. I'm going to pull up my UV editor just so you can see it again while we're doing this. And I'm going to take that checkerboard thing off there just so you can see this. Again, the way I made it like a solid shape is to click this. There's a lot of different ways you can set this up to where you can see how you view it with these buttons up here. But just so you can see it a little bit more clearly, I'm going to do it like this. Okay. And what I'm going to do is up here in my UVs menu, so up here along the top of my box, I'm recording this, aren't I? Yes. Up here along the top, UVs, right, we have a lot of different options in here. So some of the things you'll notice, there's our UV editor up there at the top. There's our UV set editor. Don't worry about that yet. And then there's this list of different things, like automatic, and then best plane, and camera-based, and contour stretch, and cylindrical, planar, all of these different things, right? These are sort of these preset ways that Maya can analyze your model and try to unwrap it in a way that makes sense. Okay? None of these are going to be your final UV solution if you want to do some like complex texturing, but they are a way to get you a start. Okay? So let's just try spherical, right? Let's imagine my object was kind of a sphere. If I click spherical, what you'll see is it kind of wraps this virtual sphere around here, around my box. And if I go look at what it gave me for my UVs, like that's actually way closer than what it used to be, right? Like I can at least kind of start to see elements that are my box. The weird thing here though is I select that, and it appears to be both the inside and outside of my box, right? Like it's like there's parts of my box that are overlapping each other. So that one will work, but not well. Right? So let's try some of these others, right? Like there's one in here that I think is neat, which is if I go to UV, there's this camera-based, and if I click that, and my UVs like line up very closely to where my camera is, right? And what this would allow us to do is if there was a very specific face I needed to project, or I needed to like see from one camera angle, or I wanted to get my texture projected from one camera angle, I could just position my camera and do that to sort of extract that UV in that way, right? The one that most people use the most to just get started is under UV automatic. And that word is so misleading. Automatic sounds like, oh, we're going to do it for you. Don't worry. Automatic is, what it's going to do is it's just going to assume you made this in 3D space, right? And 3D space exists out of 3 axes that both have a positive and a negative. So we got forward, backward, side to side, and up and down, right? Or left, right, and up and down. And so what it's going to do is it's just going to project from each of those angles, all 6 of those angles, and whichever angle your model's face is mostly pointing toward, it will extract that out into its own UV shell. So you can kind of see what happens when I go to UV automatic. Like it does okay, right? Like this is what I get. Now this is in no way finished, right? But it's a good start. Right? Now some of the things that are not such a good start is like this part up here. You'll notice that it projected that from one angle, so it's kind of foreshortened. So even though that's kind of long, it makes it look shorter here. Right? But we're off to some form of version of this, and I can at least start guessing what some of these objects are. Did I rotate that? Okay. Anyway, so we have all of this. The problem with this is it's still like kind of a mess, right? It's still kind of all over the place. What I want to show you is if you just start selecting an edge, and if I select this edge, notice that 2 edges get highlighted. Right? This edge and then this other one right over here, right? So I get these 2 edges that are getting highlighted. The reason for that is what Maya did is it cut all these objects along these edges, right, and extracted them out into their own UV shells or islands, is one of the things we call them. But in real like 3D space, those edges are still welded together. Right? So if I select one edge, Maya says, the other edge is over there that it was originally connected to. Right? So it automatically selects it as well. Now, if I select a UV, or let me show you this. If I select a vertex, I select that vertex. If I look around, I can see that there's another instance of that vertex, and then there's another instance of that vertex, right? It's because that vertex I selected was connected at 3 different intersections, right? So when I select that vertex, it's finding all instances of that vertex in this 3D space. For every vertex, though, there can be more than one UV, right? Because I broke this up into UV space. If I select just a single UV, if I select that, right, that is the point that is associated with that part of the texture. Not, I mean, it aligns with the 3D model over here and everything. I'm trying to find it for you. There he goes. Oh, that's on the inside. Let's grab one you can see. So if I grab that one, there we go. So it's right there, right? This vertex, or this UV is right there. And the one I have selected is for this shell, right? And so I can move it around and change what that's pointing at. And if I'm looking at my texture, you can see that. And it's just going to change that one corner of it, right? It's not changing, sorry. Let's try this again so you can see. If I select this UV, it's moving around that corner, not the bottom corner or the side corner, right? And so they're like, there's multiple different elements that, like when you split a vertex up, we can have multiple UVs for every vertex. Anyway, that was a long way to go to kind of explain that. When I select an edge, though, we find the corresponding edge automatically highlights, right? And so what that means is we can start welding those back together. You'll notice we have all sorts of different tools over here. What am I looking at? There we are. So I have all sorts of different tools over here associated with my UVs. If your UV toolkit doesn't show up, it's under Tools, and I think it's this Hide UV Toolkit or Show UV Toolkit. All of these tools are also up here in your menu somewhere. So I'm going to go to Cut and Sew, because if I wanted to, I could go in here and cut off parts of this that are sewed together, or I can select edges that are not sewn together, and I can sew them. Now, if I just hit Sew, it's going to do that, and that's not very good, right? What I really want to do is stitch together, right? So if I do that, it's going to move the whole UV shell and sort of align it. And so I can start doing this with my box, stitch together. And I can just click that a few times, and now I suddenly have my entire box all as kind of one piece, right? Or at least the whole outside edge. And I can select UV shell, and I can rotate this around 90 degrees and have it. If you hold J when you're rotating, it will snap to increments of 15 degrees. And then I can just kind of move this around, right? So now I have pretty much my entire outside of my box laid out, right? So this is how we kind of go around or go through this and put this back together. Now, something you'll notice is I don't have the bottom of my box. So if I grab the edge there, you'll see that's the outside bottom of my box. I do stitch together, and it'll kind of put that there. I'll go through here really kind of quickly, do the rest of this. I scaled the inside of my box in at the bottom just a little bit, so that's why it's not lining up as a perfect square. Shell, G. And then we have this part right here, which is again on the inside. I'm going to select the other one there, stitch together. And then we have all these little bitty edges. Now these little bitty edges are part of, like that's this stuff here. like these pieces right here that we have. And so I want to stitch those together. My real question is, do I want those to have a color on them, or do I want those to be cardboard? Right, yes?
When you were rotating and moving around, were you just like selecting all the faces or something, or were there specific
Oh no, if you right click on it and say UV shell, that will select all connected parts, and you can have that like that. You could also, if you went to UV, you could select all of those UVs and move them around that way too. But UV shell will select all like connected pieces as one unit. So for me, I want those inside edges to kind of line up with my cardboard side of the box. So I'm just going to go through here and select those. Stitch together. Oh, did that work? Oh no, did that wrong. I want that piece. Stitch together. So I'm kind of putting those on there. Doing it again. Why is it doing that? Oh, because that edge is already connected down there. Okay, I'm all right with that. And then sort of the same over here. So I'm just trying to find where these little pieces will fit in. And so now they're all on there somewhere, right? Now, whenever I create a texture, I'm going to create a square texture. We'll talk about why here in a minute. But it's going to be the same width as it is length. And so the last thing I really need to do is I need to arrange these shells somewhere in my UV space here so I have enough room for all of it to fit in one image, right? So again, I'm going to go to UV shells, select that. I'm going to move it in here. And I'm going to try to get it all to fit in here without having to mess anything up. But I am going to kind of have to make it fit. And so usually what I do is if I have to sacrifice scale on one of them, it's the one that has the least amount of detail that is necessary. And so the inside of the box, to me, is a little less important than the outside of the box. So I can do something like this. Move this up. This. So what I'm really trying to do is just get it all within this one-to-one shell of UV space there, right? Okay. I will admit, this is not most people's favorite part. Like this is not what most people enjoy doing. Like, just like I hate wrapping Christmas presents. Like I hate it. I'm like, can we just buy some bags and put them in there? I'll pay more. I don't care. Like, this is not necessarily super exciting. I'll show you that it's getting better. Like UV unwrapping, although a little bit painful still yet, or a little bit annoying. It's more like it's tedious, right? There's a lot of little manipulations you have to do to get this. And this still isn't even textured. We've just sort of laid this out to where we can texture it. There's a couple of new tools that make this a little easier, because I'm sure what you're already thinking is like, what if I get like a character's face, right? Like what does the UV mapping of a character's head look like? And if you let me find a larger image so I can show you. The answer is this, right? Again, like we kind of have to unwrap this in a way that we can create a texture for a character's head. And just imagining doing like this like automatic mapping and stitching all that together and trying to get it all evenly spaced and everything, like that's not fun, right? There's a couple of tools that have came out that work really well for doing organic UVs, right? If you need to do a character, this is the head, this is the torso and arms, maybe legs, feet, right? There's a couple of tools that have came out that make this a little bit more optimized. I'm going to go ahead and save this, and then we're going to try it on this box to see if it works any better, Okay, I actually haven't tried it on this one to see, but we'll see. First thing I want to do though before I save it is like this is all of those inputs that I just created. Like this is all the history I just created when I was unwrapping it and doing all those automatic mapping and all that stuff to it. So I'm going to do edit delete by type history again, just to get rid of that stuff. And then I'm going to go ahead and save this file, save scene as, just so I don't mess anything up. I'll go back to my workspace root. Breakfast cereal box. And then I'm going to try like one of these other tools, right? So I'll show it to you on another object first, just so you kind of understand how it works. So if I have a sphere, right? A sphere UV is not easy to unwrap, right? If we go look at what, so Windows Modeling Editor, UV Editor, this is what Maya does automatically for a sphere. And so all these little triangles along the top are the little triangles along the top of our sphere, right? And there's some on the bottom too. Right? And you'll see this white edge there. That white edge is the spot where the seam happens, where it's cut, right? And if I were to put a texture on there, the thing that's kind of wrong with this is that this little checkerboard at the top is getting all squiggly and squished, whereas it's much bigger squares in the middle, right? And so what's happening is your UVs are kind of getting stretched at the top and the bottom, or it's more like they're getting squashed, I guess, at the top and the bottom and stretched to the middle. So I'm not necessarily sure that what I'm getting ready to do will give us a better UV, but there may be a very specific thing you need to happen with your UVs of this object. So what really happened is Maya decided where to make those cuts, right? It made it at this triangle, and it made it along here. And then it just stretched it back out as if it were like an animal pelt, right? What I'm going to do is I'm going to try to create my own cuts and do a different type of like pelting simulation, right? So the way I'm going to do this is first I have to get it all back into one UV shell that's all stitched together, where there's no cuts at all. The easiest way to do that, there's two different ways we could do that. We could go in here and select all of our edges, which I currently have, and then I can just hit sew, and it just sews them all together, and that's really bad UVs now because a lot of stuff is overlapping, but it has no cuts in it at all now, right? The other thing I could do is instead of doing it that way, I could go to my UVs and do that camera-based projection. And so now it's all sewed together again, but we're getting like one piece, but it's from one camera angle. Now something you'll notice is like when I have this turned on, and I have that where you can see it as a single, or where you can see like the color of it a little bit better, when it's purple, that means it's those faces are facing your UVs, and then when it's red, that means I had to flip them around because we stitched them, and so that means they're whatever texture you put on there would apply to this part backwards, right? But that's not really what we're worried about right now. Right now, we're just wanting to make sure that we can cut this up however we want to, right? And so I can go in here to edges, right? And I could do like a cut all the way around there, around the center, right? And then maybe a cut all the way around here, right? And so I just get these two seams, and I get to choose where I want those seams to be, and I just go in here and hit cut. So you'll see as it did is it sort of disconnected those parts. If I went here to UV shell, you'll see now this is two pieces, and if I went in here to UV and grabbed these, I can move those apart from each other, right? So it kind of cut those apart. The reason I did this is so we could run what's called an unfold on this. So if we go to modify, and this unfold, it's Control U, right? What it's going to do is it's going to look at this mesh, it's going to look at all of those edges, all of those vertices, and it's going to try to evenly distribute them out in a way that makes sense, So it's going to use my cuts to determine how to do that. So if I select all of my UVs and I hit modify, unfold, I'm going to choose my options box. You want to make sure that unfold 3D is checked. That's the new one. There's an older version of unfold that doesn't work quite as well. So I'm going to go ahead and leave it like that and hit apply and close. You'll see what it does is it kind of just automatically stretches those out for us. This works best in objects that have some form of organic, like some sort of like roundedness to it, right? So we could probably do this for our coffee cup, right? We could probably do this maybe for our cereal bowl or something like that if you wanted some textures on that. Let's see what happens when we do this to our cereal box. It may work. I honestly don't know. I haven't tried this one yet to see. It didn't used to work very well on organic objects, right? So we have our cereal box. It's already got these UVs in it, so we can always come back to this if this doesn't work. I'm going to go to UV and set this to camera based, so it's all one piece. And I'm going to figure out where I want to cut this, right? So I want to go in here to edge. I want to cut that edge. I want to cut all the way around the top of this, because I want the inside sort of cut out from the outside. I want to move that over so we can see it a little bit better. There we go. And I'm sure I want the inside cut here as well, and here. And then I want to make sure that the bottom of my box has some reasonable cuts on it as well. So I want to cut out sort of that bottom flap here and on the inside. Right? And so I know that that maybe wasn't completely intuitive to you about why I made those cuts there, but we can talk about that a little bit more if you have some issues with this. In my UV editor here, I'm just going to hit cut. And so it's going to separate the inside of my box pretty much from the outside of my box. Right. And I got a cut down the center of that, and I've sort of cut the bottom flap open as well. So the way to think about this is if you, and I mean, you can actually do this if you want to, get an old cereal box and cut it in a way that you would want to be able to lay that out flat, right? The other thing about that is if you do that, you could then scan in or take pictures of both sides of that cereal box, and we can use that to make our texture. So I have these two things cut. Let's try running that unfold on here and see what happens. I'm going to select all my UVs. You're going to modify, unfold. So that actually works pretty good. It's sort of stretching some of the inside here a little more than I want, but this is giving me my two UV shell. So my outside UV shell I'm really pretty happy with. I need to sort of straighten it up a little bit, but I can work with that, right? My inside UV shell is like sort of squishing a little bit at the bottom, and I have a feeling that some of that may be because these edges are still sewn together right here. So just to give it a little bit more breathing room, I'm going to go through there and cut those two. Get all these, get that one, I want to hit cut. And so I'll run that UV unwrap on this again. So select all my UVs, I'm sorry, unfold, modify, unfold. And so that made that a little bit better, right? And since this is going to be the part that has just my cardboard texture on it, I'm okay with that, right? So just to kind of lay this out differently again, this is the outside of my box, right? This is the inside of my box. And I just want them both to sort of fit inside of here relatively well. I also want to maximize as much of my UV space as I can. So I'm going to go ahead and scoot this down, something like this, and then scale this up. Now this doesn't have to all be stitched together. Like you could cut the back of the box out and have that in a separate spot if you want to. I'm just kind of trying to make this in a way that we can intuitively see it, right? Okay. So let's say this is our UVs. We got it all laid out in a way that we want. Before I go any further, I want to figure out, just to make sure, which part of this box is the front of my box. Okay. So if this is the way I'm going to film or shoot this, like record this, and I want this to be the front of my box, I can grab this face, and if I go over here and look, I'll see that that face is where the front of my box is going to be. Okay, and I'm just doing this so I can remember this. That face is where the front is going to be, and that means that face over there is where the back of it's going to be. And that means the top section is the outside of my box, the bottom section is the inside of my box. Okay, I'm actually going to save this because I actually like this one better because it worked. The other reason I like it better is I think that these flaps are probably distributed a little more evenly. And again, if I click this texture board on here, this is a way you can sort of look at it to see if your texture is stretching anywhere. So we're getting a little bit right in there, but I'm okay with that, I think. It'd be nice if I could straighten that up a little bit. Oh, do I have this set up wrong? Oh, I do. I have this scaled out over like 4 UV shells. That's good to know. I'm glad I did that. Because I actually put this wrong. Pretty much have to grab all of these UV shells, scale that down, and try to fit them into one box. I was misjudging where I was actually at, how far out I was actually scaled out. So something like that. Yeah. Okay. There it is. I'm going to go ahead and save this again. File, increment, and save. Sure. Now, I've went through all that work. I still don't have a texture on this thing, right? I did this because some of you actually like to draw. Some of you actually like to use Photoshop. How many of you have never used Photoshop before? Just out of curiosity. Okay, that's cool. I'm going to show you some very basic Photoshop stuff today, but very basic. If you're comfortable in Photoshop, that's cool. Like, run with it. Use whatever tools you know. But what we have now is something that I could take into Photoshop and start making my own texture, right? So the way I take this into Photoshop is I need to save out this image so I can work with it. So I go to Images, UV Snapshot, and what this is going to do is it's going to save a file of these lines. Right? And then I can take that into Photoshop and use that as my guide on how to create my texture. So I want it to be 2048 by 2048. Anybody know why it's 2048? Like, why not 2000? Why that weird number, 2048? Anybody? So, while I'm waiting for you to answer, I'm going to play a game. Actually, if you type in 2048, this is a game you can download on your phone too. Anybody ever played 2048? The game? Oh yeah, it's kind of fun. Basically, what you get is you get like a 2 and a 2, right? And if I combine those 2's together, if I just hit an angle, if those two sort of clash together like that, I get a 4 and a 4, right? And so I can combine those 2 4's and I get an 8, right? I keep going. I've actually never gotten 2048 on this game before, but my wife has. So if I can get 8 and 8 and combine those together, I get 16. Right? I can make you watch me play this game all day, but that seems wrong of me, that I shouldn't do that. 16 and 16 is 32. What's 32 and 32? Ooh, you didn't think you were going to have to do math today, did you? 64. What's 64 and 64? 128. Right? Anybody know what 128 and 128 is? It's 256, isn't it? 256 and 256 is 512. 512 and 512 is 1024. 1024 and 1024 is 2048. So we get these suspiciously familiar numbers, right? 8. Anybody remember the 8-bit NES? The Nintendo Entertainment System was 8-bit. And then the next generation, you all don't remember this, but everybody was geeking out because it was going to be 16-bit. What? The N64, 64-bit, right? You'll notice some of these numbers, maybe just from digital media history. You have to take those. 256 colors, right? All of these are numbers that are based off a binary system. A 1 and a 0 means all of the decisions in a computer have to be made binary, like 2, right? And so we're getting our exponents of 2, right? So once we keep climbing and climbing and climbing, the reason for that, to overly simplify it, is that if it's in that number, it fits more snugly into the hardware, right? Like if you have RAM, a stick of RAM that is, so big, it's going to be one of these numbers, right? It's going to be a 1024, and so a chunk of your information will fit neatly into that without any leftover, and so then it doesn't like round off, and you're not being inefficient. So generally, just for efficiency reasons for math, we just use 2048 or 1024 or 4096, like these numbers that round easily to a binary system. Don't sweat it too much right now. Just play this game sometime. You'll start to remember them. But you'll hear them referred to pretty often. 1024, 2048. These are numbers that just become part of your life. And so what we're doing is a 2048 by 2048 map, right? It's 2048 pixels wide by 2048 pixels tall. And that's going to be the size of our texture map. And although you won't notice a lag in a single texture if you made it something different, if you have thousands of textures in an animated film or a game, it just slows the whole process down. So what I do want to do is I want to save this image as a different file type. I'm going to save mine as a PNG because right now it's set to Maya IFF. Just don't ever use that. Like that's the old Maya standard image format. Maya created its own image format, and it never caught on for anything except Maya. And so now we don't really use that, but for some reason Maya keeps thinking you want to. And this will show you where it's going to put it. It's going to put it under my images folder of my breakfast file, right? It's calling it out UV. I'll call this serial UV, so I'm able to find it. And I'm just going to hit apply and close. I will say you can also change your edge color. If you wanted to make that something like red, hit apply and close. Now what you'll see is if I go over to my images folder, I put it in my images, not my source images, you'll see my old mug UVs. Remember that mug I made earlier? This is some of the UVs from that. And you'll see my serial UVs. You can't see those as well right now because it's red on black. Maybe you can kind of see them in there a little bit. But the reason it's on black is because everything except for the red lines are transparent. Okay? So I'm going to open this up into Photoshop. Some of you may not have Photoshop at home, and that's okay. I will tell you that I'm just using Photoshop because Photoshop is what is on this computer. There's actually a lot of free alternatives to Photoshop. If you go to Alternative to, there's a website here. And if you type in Photoshop, yeah, let's do Adobe Photoshop, that one. You'll see all of the different alternatives to Photoshop that do something very similar, right? The one that a lot of people are moving to right now is Affinity Photo. It does really well. Krita is completely free. It's open source. So is GIMP. I'm going to just tell you this one because I think it's kind of neat. What I kept calling Photopea, I think it may be Photopia, but I'm still going to keep calling it Photopea, is a free web-based site. So if you go to official website, it's basically Photoshop embedded on the internet. So it's like all of this, it's very similar tools. And so this is actually a really neat little website if you want to use it. It'll even, I think, allow you to save out as a PSD file. And so you can use this one too. We're kind of converting this class to an online class as well. And so this is how I'm going to recommend people use it because it's really kind of, Photoshop can be kind of expensive, right? And this doesn't have everything that Photoshop has, but it has a lot of it, right? We can say File, Open, and I can go find that images, my mug UVs right there. Serial UV, Open. You'll see that it opens it up in there, right? And I can do a lot of stuff in here. I can, like what I would really probably do just so I can start seeing my edges a little bit better is I usually use images, adjustments, and then you can either do levels or brightness and contrast. I can probably take my contrast way up, maybe my brightness way down. I don't know what that is. So that's helping a little bit. So they're starting to pop out there a little bit. I can also duplicate these layers a few times. And sometimes that helps. Control. And then I can merge them down to get them into one layer. But really all I'm looking for is a guide here, right? If I kind of click in here and zoom in, you can start to see those lines a little bit better, right? And you can see that now I have my my layers in here in a layer in here that is my UVs. Okay. Now, these UVs are just here to guide me as I'm making a texture. Before I save this texture out, I'll want to hide those UVs, right? Because I don't want red lines on my texture. Right? I don't want my cereal to have a bunch of red lines all over it. So let's just start seeing what we want to make our cereal here. How about Cap'n Crunch? So there's all sorts of Cap'n Crunch out there, right? I can go in here. Let's do the peanut butter ones. And open image in a new tab. And there we go. I got this Cap'n Crunch image. I could sort of save this and start using that. You can also go into Illustrator or Photoshop or whatever, and you can completely design your own cereal box, right? Or maybe you have a favorite cartoon character, and you're like, why is there not a Gravity Falls cereal? Like, run with it. Like, this is your chance to kind of do whatever you want with this. Maybe you have a cartoon character of yourself, right? And you're like, I want it to be me cereal, right? So do whatever you want to. I will say just some Google image search tips. I can search Google Images. I do not own the copyright to this, right? Which means a lot of different things. It means that whatever image I make here, if I'm using this, I'm using copyrighted material, right? Which means I can't make money off of it, right? You can use whatever you want to learn. It's that you're actually covered by that. It's called the Fair Use Act, right? Which says that you're allowed to draw pictures of Moana all you want to in order to learn how to be better at drawing, right? What you're not allowed to do is draw pictures of Moana and claim that you invented Moana and sell those and say, hey, look at this, this is a genuine Moana drawing, right? Then you're stealing someone's copyrighted material. If you flip that around on you, let's say you created a character or you create an illustration and somebody says, hey, look at this free illustration I found on the internet. I'm going to put it on a t-shirt and sell t-shirts of it, right? That actually happens all the time. I have multiple friends. One of my friends is a really great illustrator who's had to get cease and desist orders against companies who are printing copies of her illustrations on T-shirts and hats and selling posters of them. Right? You're an artist, so someday you're going to want to be able to have some form of control over your own art so you can use it to make money, just like all these other artists do. Again, for this class, I'm not being hardcore about copyright in terms of what you use for textures. But think about that just in the future. Like, it's very easy to fall into the, I'm making a video game, I need some brick texture, I'm going to Google brick and use this photograph that somebody took, right? Well, somebody owns that. And if they want to, if you make money off of that, they could sue you and pretty much own that product that you made, right? So just kind of go smart about that. In terms of like using for something like this for learning, like it's not all of you are great graphic designers who can model or who can create a full or a full cereal box texture. So we can start searching for some of this. You could also go out. You may have cereal in your house. You can take pictures of all 4 sides of it or all 5 sides of it and compile that together in Photoshop. What I'm going to do is I'm going to go under Tools and under Size. I'm going to change this to large. And what that means is I get a little bit more texture space on these images. So you see these are 1600 by 1600 or 1100 by 1500, right? So I'm getting something that's a little bit of a larger image that I can use, right? Ooh, we could do one of the older Captain Crunches. Those are kind of neat. Deep Sea Crunch. Great fruity taste. What? Okay. Sorry. Open image in new tab. So now we'll see that this image is way bigger than this image, right? So I'm going to use this even though it's got some issues with it. Actually, that's the full size of it. And I'm going to say save image as. You can put that in your folder, in your reference folder, or wherever you want to put it. I'm not really that particular right now, so I'm just going to go back to, where's Photopea at? There it is. I think I put that on my desktop. I should pay more attention to what I'm doing, shouldn't I? Where did I save it? Save image as. Oh, it's in my downloads. Let's just do this. So there it is. Okay. So now it's this enormous thing in my texture file here. And I want to resize this so it lines up with my UVs. I just want to drag this underneath it just so I can see my UVs on top of it. Do that. There we go. So now I can kind of see this red outline of my UVs on top of it. I can hit Control T, which, oh, apparently that doesn't work in here. It works in Photoshop if you decide you want to use Photoshop for this. I can probably do Edit, Transform, and I'm just going to do Free Transform. It's usually what Control T does. And if I hold Shift, it should allow me to scale this down. Start manipulating this in a way that it lines up. My texture box. So we get something like this. Oh, it still has that. I need to rasterize it. I do. Some of the other things we can do in here, again, I can use my paintbrush. I can highlight this. I think if I hit Alt, it'll allow me to sample that color. You'll see now I'm painting with that color. And I can use that to paint all of this background. In fact, I could probably create a new layer in here and just fill bucket that background color. What's that? Paint bucket. And so now everything is that color. And I can kind of slowly go in here and, this is my eraser. Slowly go in here and erase different parts of this. Probably want a softer brush for this. So, creating textures takes a little bit of work, I'll be honest. And I'm doing a very sloppy job of it just for the sake of this class, like to get something done for you. So it's all right that that's like that out there. And just over here, I will create a new layer. Text tool, there we go. Create text tool, click right there. We'll say other stuff, and you can be making that. For the inside, I do want a cardboard texture. Now, some of you have asked about texture places we can get textures. I think there's textures.com. Site can't be reached. Was it CG Textures? Is that what it's called? Textures.com. There it is. Turns out it can be reached. So there. You have to sign up for a free account for this, but they have so many textures you can download for free every day, actually. And so I can try cardboard. Right? And it says they have 128 different pieces of cardboard texture. So really I'm just needing something like this. These are a little rough looking. I don't necessarily know if I would eat cereal out of that. Maybe something like this. This is looking kind of this corrugated box look. Maybe that. What about that? Yeah, let's try this one right here. It's still not great, but there we go. And so I can get that one. I've purchased it already in the past. I'll go ahead and do the medium one, just because I need a pretty decent sized one. Save that there too. There we go. And folder, go back to Photo P and drag my cardboard into here. Again, just going to kind of move this into place down here. I don't want it showing up on the bottom of my box. So I'll again hit enter. I'll right click on here to rasterize it, just so I can paint over it or erase it. And then I'll go ahead and erase this from the bottom part of my box. So obviously this step of creating your texture takes a little bit of time, right? So I would encourage you to take a little bit of time, work on this. When you're done, when you have something you want to test out, and you don't have to be completely done to test it out, you'll turn off your UVs layer, because this is what your texture should look like, right? And I'm going to say File, and I can save it as a PSD and open it up in Photoshop, or I could export my asset. I could do a PNG. PNG has a tendency to be what I use a lot of. So you can see this is the PNG file it's going to make. Save. And I'm going to save this one in my source images, right? Oh, man. There it is. In my source images folder. I'm going to save it there. Control C. And we'll call this cereal color. Hit save. Now, all we have to do now, and this is why this is, I know this has been a lot of steps so far. To apply this texture on here, all I got to do, assign a new material. It can be any material, AI standard surface. That looks great. And so on my AI standard surface, I just need to map that map that we just made into our color channel. So if I go to color, file, and then choose this image and find serial color, you'll see that's the image. And it doesn't look like anything happened. Right? So some of you remember 4 is wireframe, 5 is shaded. And shaded means that we can see the sort of the general color of the objects and stuff like that, but it doesn't load any of the textures. 6 is textured, right? And so we're going to see that Captain Crunch is now on the front of my cereal box. We got this cardboard on the inside. We got some other stuff on the back. And so, again, I was very sloppy with how I made this in Photoshop. You would want to take some time and kind of put together an entire cereal box texture and sort of wrap that around there, right? Now, I will show you, I haven't tried this. I know that you can actually do this the other way around. You can take 3D objects into Photoshop now and paint on them. And there are other software that is designed for texture painting in 3D. In terms of this cereal box, I think it's gonna be a lot easier to texture that in Photoshop just because it's a lot of type, it's a lot of all that stuff. You could also do it in Illustrator if you're feeling more comfortable in Illustrator. Any of that stuff is completely fair game, right? So I know this was a long class to talk about texturing, and texturing is not about UVs, right? It's because every time I've ever taught this class, at the end of the semester, I say, what do you wish we would have had more time to cover? And they always answer UVs. So I've kind of adapted this now to where I can show you how UVs work. I understand that that was a lot of tedious steps, and it's okay if your takeaway from this is, I don't like UVs, right? It's okay. I don't like UVs either, but we have to do them anyway, right? And that is sort of the painful part about a lot of different things. I'm sure that somewhere there's an archaeologist who is annoyed that they're having to crunch some statistical data or something like that, right? Like we all have these different elements that are kind of the tedious parts. I like to think of UVs as washing the dishes. I love to eat, but I hate to wash the dishes, right? But if I'm going to eat, I need a dish to eat it off of, so I got to wash it, right? And so if you want this to look good, if you want to have a nice piece that you can say, hey, check this out, I'm awesome. UVs are just one of those kind of tedious parts you have to work through. So I expect that this is not going to be super easy and that everybody's just going to click on everything and it's going to work. Next class period, we are going to move in a little bit to the to some of the simulation. I want to show you how to model the cereal. It's really complex. You do this, you're done, right? Make a sphere. I know that some of you are wanting to do oblong shaped cereal, but all we need is one piece of cereal, right? And we're going to make that turn into hundreds of pieces of cereal, and we're going to pour it out of the box. Okay? My 2 cents, if you decide you want to make a Cheerio or something like that, you can. Recognize that that's going to be a little bit of research outside of class and with me sitting down with you to make that rotate. If you make a spherical piece of cereal, nobody will notice whether it's rotating or not, and so it's kind of a little bit of a trick that we're playing there, right? So that's just my 2 cents about how I would kind of handle that. So, questions, comments, any of this stuff? Yay, nay. All right. So I'm going to go ahead and stop the video here in a minute. What I would encourage you to do is get your your box UV unwrapped. Get the rest of your models sort of in a good place by the end of next class. Again, if you're modeling a spoon, unless you're wanting some intricate design on the handle of that spoon, you really don't have to do that much in terms of UVs for that, right? If you're creating some cream of wheat to go on your table too, you may want to do a little bit more UV unwrapping. So, all right, rest of the class is yours. Don't forget, if you missed the attendance sheet, it's up here in the front. And I will see you all next class period.